What's up, guys, and welcome back. And this video is going to be a little different. So we have the challenges coming up this weekend, starting off with Lyle and Atlanta. Myself and Brad will be at the Atlanta challenge, so if you see us, come say hey. But I wanted to kind of go through some tips and tricks and whatever that you may want to know before you get to a big event like that. Now, myself and Brad, we've competed at a lot of these big events like Opens and GPs for Magic, as well as Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that. So we're just trying to give you the experience that we wish we would have known at the first event. All right, so for the first thing I want to talk about is just be prepared. Not the card. We're not talking about playing Ruby at the event. If you are, good luck with that. But what I'm talking about is be prepared for a long event. These events aren't just like your normal leagues or anything like that where you play 3 or 4 rounds. These are 9 rounds. There's a break in the middle. So realistically, you're playing for close to 10 or 11 hours when all is said and done for just day one. So be prepared for a long day and also something of a more structured tournament. So again, some leagues and things, they may be a little structured, but here you've got 2,000 people that are going to be participating. So when you're running around between rounds, trying to find your table and things like that, just make sure you're on top of things. Now, I would recommend downloading the app to whatever event you're going to, because the app should let you know where your pairings are, what table you're at, and just go ahead and get a lay of the land prior to everything kicking off so you know where the tables are located, kind of the general order of how they're going, so you know, all right, I need to be on the left side or the right side, or it's up front or it's toward the back. Just kind of get situated so that right when you get your pairings, you can get there, you can get seated, and you can get ready. Now, one of the LGSs or something like that, they're probably going to be a little, lenient about being on time and things like that. But at events like this, they actually have timers. So if you're not seated and ready to go in a certain amount of time, then you're going to get a match loss or game loss. And then after that, you'll get a match loss if you're, so many more minutes late. So again, don't let it stress you out. Everybody's going to be trying to figure it out. And of course, round 1 and round 2 are always the hardest ones where everybody's running around. But as you go through the day, you'll get the hang of it. So just, download the app, get ready, and be prepared. All right, so for the second one, it's all about eating and drinking. When you're there for 10 hours, a lot of people kind of forget about that. So I would recommend bringing a water bottle. I like the stainless steel water bottles. That way my water is going to stay cold. I've filled this thing up with ice, and I'm sure there's going to be bottle refills everywhere in the facility that you're at. So just make sure you're drinking a lot of water. And when it comes to food, I like to get things that are like high in protein, whether it's, these protein bars or some trail mix, granola, something like that. Because again, in between rounds, you're going to make sure that you're doing that, taking care of yourself. Now, we should have a lunch break within there. But keep in mind, especially here in Atlanta, we're competing with MomoCon. Yes, there's places to get food, but when you figure there's that many people in one place, lines are going to be long and it's going to be a little hard to get that food. So just make a note of when those times are. If you've got a friend or a buddy there that's maybe not competing, maybe they can run and get you food in between rounds or something like that. But just keep in mind, stay hydrated, make sure you eat, because you don't want to go 11 hours without eating. Because if you're doing that, you're probably also not playing the best because your body's focusing on everything else. So number 3, kind of continuing down this path of what you need to know, is kind of your board state. So these are more tips, I guess, and maybe tricks. But one of the things that I would recommend is understanding your board state and making sure you keep a clean board state. This is pretty important because when you get at these events, again, this isn't like your small 30-person event. This is huge, and you want to make sure that you're making the best plays possible. These are tips and tricks that I've learned from competing at a lot of different events, and we're going to kind of break down each of these as I go. So the first one is just going to be board placement. Make sure you have your ink to where you can see it. Make sure your ink is fanned out, or, however you want to do it, but make sure it's not stacked up on each other. You want to make sure you understand and you know how much ink you have, and allow your opponent to also see how much ink you have. You don't want any kind of issue where you're tapping too many or you're not tapping enough because maybe it's not clear of exactly what you're doing with your mana or your ink, and you don't want that to be an issue where they're calling a judge because you maybe tapped wrong on your ink. So just fan that out. And if your opponent is also playing with stacked ink or something like that, ask them to fan it out, because I believe in the rules, it can't be stacked like that. It needs to be visible so that you can see it. As we continue on with ink, the other thing I will recommend is actually making sure you exert your ink. Make sure when you're playing a card, you're exerting your ink so that they understand what you're using, what's left on the board. And if your opponent isn't exerting their ink, ask them to do it. Tell them to do it, because you're supposed to exert the ink when you use the ink. I've seen a lot of people at smaller tournaments that I've been at right now, and even some of the bigger ones, where they don't exert their ink. And the problem with this is they may play some cards and you may not be able to keep up with how much ink they actually have left. So in this example, I've got my cards and I've got my 4 ink. I played Kidda face down for my 2 ink and I didn't tap it. Right? So I say, I play this. All right. Now I'm kind of talking to you. I'm asking you, okay, so last turn you did this, you did that, whatever it may be. And then I come back and I say, okay, well, I'm going to play this 2-drop Mickey. I'm going to play this 2-drop Aurora. Now I've used my 4 ink, but technically I've used all 6 now. But because Kidda came down in bodyguard mode and I've distracted you and you kind of forgot that Kidda came down this turn and not last turn because she's, tapped. So maybe in your mind, maybe she quested last turn or something like that. It's very easy at these events because there's a lot going on. There's people everywhere that you kind of forget that. And now they've gotten to play an extra card. Sometimes people may do that, on accident. And again, I like to see the best in a lot of people, but when it comes to these kind of tournaments and the money that's on the line and all of that kind of stuff, yeah, they may try to get every little bit out of it. And if they don't get caught, they're going to continue doing it. So I would just always recommend making sure you're tapping that ink, exerting the ink, understanding what's being played on the board. Do that on your side and make sure your opponent is also doing it on their side. All right, continuing down the path of ink in your hand, make sure if you ever put your hand down, so if you fanned out your ink like this, when you put your hand down, put all the cards together in a stack by themselves. Make sure you have a lot of room in between them, because what you definitely don't want to happen is you to accidentally pick up your ink and start to look at it. This is against the rules, and this is an easy judge call that could cost you the match if you did that instead of picking your hand back up. I've seen this happen a lot of times at leagues and things like that, and most of the time people are pretty friendly. They allow you to kind of go, oh, that's fine, don't worry about it, whatever. But when it comes to these types of events, when you think of like Sapphire inking stuff that you can't see off of Mickey or something like that, them being able to look at their ink is going to be pretty huge when they understand what those Mickeys and those Talas and other cards have hit. And so these are going to be the reasons why people are going to be a little stricter about this. They're going to be calling a judge if it happens. And again, I don't want you to get a game loss for just something dumb. So make sure you put your hand over to the side. Worst case, put something on top of your hand. Maybe you got a dice or something like that just to mark your hand. But that's going to be a huge thing to remember when you're at these big tournaments. All right, so continuing with the board, the other one thing that I'll say that I like to do is when I'm playing new cards, because they're still wet, I actually put them a little behind my dry cards. So let's say Kidda is dry. I'm playing Aurora. I'm playing Mickey. You can see that they're a little behind. Now, you don't need the whole board presence, but I just like to notate that so I understand what cards I can or can't use. So let's say I played Aurora last turn and Kidda. I'm playing Mickey this turn. I put Mickey here. That way I know that, okay, I can still quest with Aurora, but Mickey is wet. He's back here. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're playing. Make sure to keep up with the board state. You don't want to be trying to do things that you're not allowed to do because that will lead to judge calls. And you don't want judge calls, at least against you. Again, we'll talk about judge calls a little bit later in this video. All right, so as we continue with the game board and all of those different pieces, one thing you want to make sure you do is make sure you remember your triggers. Triggers are going to be important. So whether it's a card allowing you to draw a card, maybe, Bucky triggering off of a flood board and coming in, make sure you remember those because there's a lot of triggers that if you miss them, you don't get them. And then there's others that if you miss them, you can get them. So an example of this would be like Queen's Castle. So if you forgot to get the lore at the beginning of your turn, technically you can still get the lore later in the game. But if your opponent keeps missing that trigger, you may want to call a judge because that is a game thing that you have to be able to keep up with. And if you keep forgetting your triggers, it's a penalty. So just remember your triggers. Make sure you know what's on the card or on the board. And one thing I like to do is I'll grab a dice. If I have a location or something like that that happens at the beginning of my turn, I put the dice on top of my deck. Pretty easy. It just lets me know, hey, I've got something to do before I draw that card. So Queen's Castle, as an example, my turn begins. I go to draw a card. I remember, oh, I have a dice. Oh, I have Queen's Castle. I need to gain 2 lore. Do I have a character on it? I do. I need to draw a card for Queen's Castle. I need to draw for turn. And as long as that location's out, I leave this die on top of my deck. That's just a tip. You don't have to do it, but it allows you to just remember that you have certain triggers as you're going through the game, and you don't miss that extra card. You don't miss that extra lore, because that can make or break a game. All right, so moving into the next one, it's shuffling the deck. Yes, you're going to shuffle your deck every single time before your game starts, and you're going to present the deck. So just keep in mind, when you shuffle your deck, make sure to do this. Present your deck to your opponent, and your opponent has the ability to either continue to shuffle or cut your deck. Now, whenever I get presented a deck, I always pick it up and I always kind of mash shuffle it like once or twice. The reason being, people can set up their decks without them actually intentionally doing or realizing that they're doing it. Because what they'll do is they'll hold their deck, and if I hold the deck like this, I can see this bottom card. And some people will look at that bottom card, and if it's a card that they really want, they'll continue shuffling. If it's a card that they can live without, maybe it's a 1-drop Robin Hood, they know they have 4 in the deck, it's not that big of a deal, they'll leave it on bottom. And so then when they present the deck, you have the choice of doing something with it. So you have to be aware of it, because what may happen is that's a card that they kind of want, but they don't want like early in the game. So they'll present it to you and they assume you're just going to cut it. And now that card is kind of in the middle of their deck. And because of that, they know that their draw spells or whatever, they're going to get to it around turn 6, 7, 8, somewhere around in there when they want it. So again, I just always recommend shuffling a couple times and presenting anytime you're presented with cutting a deck, just to make sure that it's fully shuffled. All right, so going back to kind of your board, I guess, in a way, make sure that you're slowing everything down and you understand what's going on. I know that kind of seems like a no duh, but it happens all the time at smaller events. It will happen at the big events. When people are going, they understand their deck very well if they're going to bring it to an event like this. There's going to be a lot of times where they take a card and they just go, all right, I'm inking Aurora, right? So you probably didn't actually see that card, or you only saw it for a split second. It's hard to know, was it an actual inkable card, and which Aurora was it? There's plenty of Auroras in the current format, right? So you can ask them like, hang on, can I see that card real quick? And they can show you the card. You can memorize what card they used, make sure it's inkable for them to be able to use it. Same thing goes for when they play cards. So when they play a card, whether it's Kidda into Bodyguard or maybe a card that has resist, when they play it, if you don't know what the card is, you don't know what it does, ask to read it. Say, I haven't seen that card in a while. Do you mind if I read it? They're going to say, okay. They're going to let you read it, read the card, and it goes back. This is going to be huge because, again, when you get to big events like this, there's people that have brewed their own decks. They're not playing the meta decks or anything like that. So they have their own deck, and there may be some synergies that you want to be aware of. I've had plenty of events where somebody plays a card that I haven't seen in a while. I have a removal spell. I try to use it on it, and then I realize it has resist. So that smash only does 2 damage when I thought it was going to do 3. So just be aware of that, because some of these cards may make a big difference, whether it's ward, evasion, resist, all of those different abilities are going to matter. And so make sure that you understand what's on the board, what your opponent is playing, because of course we know what our cards are. All right, so the next one is lore count. Keep up with both sides of the lore, not just your lore. And there's a lot of people with play mats that have the lore counter at the top, or maybe you have just a good old D20 or something like that, and you're only keeping up with your lore. This is probably a mistake. Yeah, most of the time, everybody's going to keep it to the lore and it's fine. Maybe they have the same playmat and you're watching it. But I would recommend always keeping up with both sides of the lore, just to make sure if maybe they bumped their dice, maybe, they wrote something down wrong. You want to make sure you're keeping up with that, because that one lore that they accidentally got off of something else, or maybe they did it on purpose, that could make or break the game, and you could lose because of that. So what I recommend doing is bringing a book, some kind of notebook or something like that, to write down the lore. Yes, you can't write down any other information. That is against the rules in Lorcana, unlike other games, but you can keep up with the lore. So I would recommend doing that. Make sure that at any given point, you know what's going on with the lore. And if you have any questions, you're able to say, oh, last turn you got 2, this one tapped. You'll be able to figure it out based on, the lore that's going on compared to, not keeping up with it and maybe losing because of it. So let's talk about gear. What should you be bringing to these events? What's helpful? What have I found over the years? And yeah, let's start with the easy one, your deck. Make sure you have your full deck. Make sure that you have all 60 cards or however many you may be playing, because you want to make sure you don't show up there missing a couple cards and having to go from vendor to vendor to try to find those cards. So make sure you have your cards. All right, so you have your deck. Make sure you have sleeves. Yeah, I mean, you can use the Lorcana official sleeves, but they're pretty much trash. The times I've used them, the art is coming off. You don't want that, because if the art is peeling and things like that, they can technically be called marked cards, and that could also give you a game loss. So make sure you have good sleeves. I like the Dragon Shield, hashtag not sponsored. Hopefully in the future video we will be, but right now, not sponsored, but I like the Dragon Shield. The Eclipse Shields are also pretty nice with the sleeves, but yeah, just make sure you have a good, solid, pair, and make sure you bring more than what you need. So if you have a 60 card deck, bring 70, bring, 120, whatever it may be, so that if something were to happen, maybe a sleeve gets ripped, maybe it gets marked, whatever it is, you can switch it out and you're not having to go to a vendor to get a whole new set of sleeves and having to re-sleeve the whole deck. So I would recommend doing that. I would also recommend, these sleeves are nice because you get to see the logo and everything. But honestly, if there's any imperfections on the backs of your cards, because maybe you played with them too hard, or again, this printing process isn't the best when it comes to Lorcana, I would recommend getting something that's kind of solid color, whether it's black, green, whatever color you like. I would recommend a solid back. That way, again, you don't run the risk of having any card that's marked. And what a marked card is, if you're new to TCGs, is if I were to, look through this deck and a card's coloring is off, and I'm able to pick that card up and say, oh, it's, Mulan. And then I shuffled it up and I went back in and said, oh, this looks like the same card and it's Mulan. You've got a marked card every single time, what's on top of your deck. So this is the reason why you want to get nice sleeves so they don't accidentally get scratched, but also sleeves that aren't clear like that, just in case when it comes to it. So that'd be my recommendation on the sleeves. All right, so moving on from sleeves, make sure you have a deck box. So when you're at these events, you're going to have to make sure that you have your set of 60 cards, your deck, and then you don't have any extra cards with your deck. There's going to be random deck checks, especially if you're going to be on camera and things like that, which sometimes happens. You want to make sure that there's nothing else there, because if they open up your deck box and you have extra cards in your deck box, that's going to be an issue, especially because Lorcana doesn't have sideboards. So make sure you have your own designated deck box for your deck. And honestly, it can be anything. It can be the official Lorcana deck boxes. They're okay. They're similar to the Ultra Pro deck boxes, where they just have kind of the flap at the top. They work. Not a problem using those. Or you can get something a little nicer. I've been using these things for, 15 years, 10 years. The Ultra Pro deck boxes, they're nice because they're hard. So I don't have to worry about anything like damaging my deck. But also at the bottom, they have a little storage for our dice and our counters and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I like these, but of course there's lots of different ones out there. There's the Sidewinder deck boxes and things like that that are pretty nice. So I would just make sure you get a deck box to keep your deck, safe. So speaking of deck boxes and dice, make sure you bring some dice. You don't necessarily have to have the D20s to keep up with your lore, but I would recommend just some dice to be able to mark the damage on your creatures, to roll for who gets to pick who goes first game 1 or 2, things like that. It's just easy to do that. And honestly, if you're not marking the damage on your characters, you have a higher chance of, having an issue later where you forgot that particular creature had 1 damage on it and you could have finished it off with a different one. So yeah, I would recommend just grabbing some dice, making sure you have them to be able to keep up with all that stuff. And the last thing that's actually gear related to your deck and playing, I would say, bring some kind of mat. Of course, this is a pretty nice looking mat right there, if I don't say so myself, but I would say I would bring some type of play mat. Now, some tables may have the nice, mat on the table already, but mostly when you get to these big events, once you get off the top few tables, those are just going to be the hard white tables, and they're fine to play on. But if you're used to playing on mats at a game store and things like that, I would definitely say it's nice to bring one of these mats, roll it up in your book bag. Sometimes you can have the tube to store them in, whatever it is, and just bring it with you. All right, so on to the non-game related items that I would recommend bringing is a backpack. So bring a backpack so you can store all this stuff in it, whether it's your food and snacks that we talked about earlier in the video, your deck, your dice, all that good stuff. And it just makes it easy when you're picking it up and moving from table to table. Be aware, if you've never been to these events, don't just leave stuff on a table. Don't just leave your deck box because you're going to talk to a friend or whatever, and you hope it's there when you come back, because it's probably not going to be there when you come back. Yeah, again, I wish everybody was awesome and that stuff didn't happen, but it happens at these events all the time. So make sure you have a backpack when you're leaving your space. Pack it up, take your backpack with you. In that backpack, I'd also probably bring a charger. So like I mentioned before, we're there for 10, 11 hours that day. So your phone, you're probably going to be using it in between rounds and things like that. You may be, using it at the side events or something for lore counters or whatever it may be. So just make sure you've got a charger. Maybe you've got one of the charging blocks, the extra battery block or something like that inside your book bag, so that you don't run out of battery. So the last thing that I can think about on the list is have fun. This whole event is all about having fun, and I know I'm going to have fun. Whether you lose round 3 or 4 and you scrub out of day 1, it's fine. There's side events that you can participate in, which are a lot of fun, whether you want to try sealed, draft, or constructed or something like that. You're able to do that at these events. There's a lot of creators there. I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, myself and Brad from the InkCast, we will be at Atlanta. And so, go meet some of the creators that you like, whether it's YouTube, Twitch streamers, maybe some of the professional gamers that are going to be there. As long as they're not in the middle of a match or they're not eating or something like that, they're usually pretty friendly. They're going to say, hey, they'll take a picture with you, whatever it may be. So yeah, I just recommend having fun for the weekend, meet the artist, play some games, whatever it is, just have fun. Now, we appreciate everything you guys are doing here at the channel. Remember, we got those different giveaways going on, so make sure you subscribe, you like the videos, you leave a comment, and with all of that, maybe you'll win one of those prizes. So appreciate you guys so much. Until next time, I'll take it easy.